Russian President Vladimir Putin offered his condolences to those who lost their lives in the Malaysian airliner crash. He blames Ukraine for the downing of the plane, saying it would not have happened if there was peace in eastern Ukraine. To discuss the Ukrainian perspective, I'm joined by Peter Voitsekhovsky, who is research director for the U.S-Ukraine Foundation. Peter, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Vladimir Putin has said, and I'm quoting here, and I want to get your reaction, the government over whose territory it occurred is responsible for this terrible tragedy. Your reaction, sir?
It's been pointed out that for a number of months, neither Mr. Putin nor his government nor the media in Moscow referred to that territory as territory of Ukraine. Back in 2008, he was telling Mr. Bush when they met in Bucharest at a NATO summit that there is no such country as Ukraine, it's a historical mistake, and so on. For the last few months, even weather reports on Moscow television were referring to the land where the plane fell as Novorossiya. That's a baby word, that's a favorite turn of language for Mr. Putin. And today was the first time when all of a sudden he and others in Moscow have been saying, oh, that's actually Ukraine.
So why didn't, going back to the actual crash, why didn't Ukraine restrict the airspace over this area? This is a dangerous area. There's fighting going on. This plane, should it have been in that area to begin with?
I'm not an expert on aircraft flight safety, but what I can say is the conflict that we observe evolving there started several months ago with people using just clubs and Molotov cocktails. In March, rioters instigated by proven subversive agents sent by Putin or by Putin's government were taking hold of firearms such as Kalashnikov guns, and that was all they had. And then all of a sudden, Ukraine government forces were discovering that these people, as it turns out, now have armored vehicles. Now they have anti-aircraft launchers, portable launchers, such as...
Does Ukraine have evidence that, you know, the Russians have provided the separatists with these types of weapons?
To the best of my knowledge, ample evidence has been reported, with photographs, with weapons taken from them in combat. All that is reported around the world.
Do you think the separatists, if in fact it was them that shot down this plane, do you think they could have pulled this off without Russian assistance?
Again, you're asking questions that should be asked a military expert. But based on what I read, I was trained as a reserve infantry officer. I know that equipment like that certainly has to be properly handled. I mean, one has to be trained probably for months or years to learn how to. So I really accept the point of those who are saying it couldn't have been done by an untrained civilian.
Who controls this area, and what can Ukraine do to make sure international investigators can have full access? Is there anything Ukraine can do to make sure they can go and investigate?
As I understand, Ukraine has been trying for months to bring order back to that area. It turned into some kind of a black hole. In fact, similar to a number of other post-Soviet territories that are now referred to as frozen conflicts. Transnistria, Ossetia, Abkhazia, those two, the two latter now have some kind of a puppet governments, but Transnistria is pretty much a black hole where real law and order don't exist. And Donetsk area, that part of Donetsk area, which now is under control of people who are called separatists, they're not true. They are fake separatists. That's my personal belief.
What do you mean by they're fake separatists?
Because separatism, if you look at the story of separatism like it was in Kosovo, was for years motivated by the nation at large, by people creating an alternative state against who they perceived as oppressor. Nothing like that has ever existed in Donetsk or anywhere else in Ukraine. It was an idea that came to Putin's mind and something that he applied resources to implement. The people in Donetsk in May were kind of sympathetic with the idea of maybe getting their orders from Moscow versus Kiev. But this was driven by what I would describe as a feast of disobedience, an expectation of maybe higher pensions or higher salaries or better job prospects, because everybody knows that Moscow, Russia with their oil reserves can provide some perhaps higher living standards, especially compared to those that are in Donetsk, which is the most depressed area of Ukraine.
And for the record,
but none of them wanted the war, none of them wanted the bombings, and now they look at the Ukrainian soldiers who come back as liberators.
For the record, we should say Russia has denied any responsibility and has also denied having any control over these rebels or separatists. What would Ukraine like to see in this conflict? Is there a way Russia and Ukraine can get together and talk to help the investigation along, to get some answers as to who was responsible for this?
You're asking me questions. Some of your questions make me think that you look at me as a representative of the Ukrainian government. I'm actually
Well,
not.
you're not a representative of the Ukrainian government, but as a Ukrainian...
As a Ukrainian, I totally agree with those who want peace there. And definitely, there must be talks and there must be some facilitation, some peace settlement. But that, in fact, Ukrainian government, I think Ukrainian government did everything they could. In mid-June, President Poroshenko proposed a ceasefire. It was a unilateral ceasefire. It lasted he extended it on request from Putin and the Western powers for additional terms. But in the course of that ceasefire, there were dozens of Ukrainian military killed and a number of civilians as well. So the people who many call separatists are not interested in peace talks. What can make them accept peace settlement? Orders from the Kremlin. That's how I see it, nothing else. Orders from the Kremlin supported by cutting off supplies for them. If the Kremlin stops showing support, they will not last even days. And it is my understanding that none of the massacres they are speaking about are going to happen. We have seen that in the territories already liberated by Ukrainians.
Can you give us a sense what perhaps Ukrainian government wants the international community to do?
From what I can see, the Ukrainian government has tried very hard to secure the border with Russia. This border only existed on paper for decades, for hundreds of years, in fact. And out of nowhere to create a full border with a state, with a neighbor that all of a sudden turned out to be a neighbor, which was a big shock for many Ukrainians, including Ukrainian leaders. That's difficult to do, especially. And while they apparently were able to make advances in securing the border, then Russia began to escalate the conflict by bringing in more armor, and now, as we can see, also anti-aircraft missiles. So what needs to be done? I think Ukraine just needs some assistance, some help. Maybe.
Do you think more sanctions are necessary? Very quickly, we're running out of time.
Sanctions work, but they don't work fast. We see how sanctions applied against Muammar Gaddafi made him basically turn about face and give away his terrorists and everything and pay. But it took about 10 years, more than 10 years. Sanctions can't work overnight.